everyone, and welcome to another global webinar for the Millennium Fellowship class of 2025. I see a couple of us are still trying to join in. While everybody joins in, let's get to know each other a little bit better. My name is Adrija. My preferred pronouns are they, them, and I am the alumni advisor here at Millennium Campus Network. Like all of you here, I was also a Millennium Fellow once upon a time in 2021, a couple of years ago now. But I am so grateful to be joining you as today's moderator for we have a very exciting webinar today, so I'm pretty pumped for that. So now that you know a little bit about me, why don't you share in the chat? I would welcome all of you to share in the chat where you're joining us from, which university you're joining us from, what is the SDG that you're advancing, and a little bit about the wonderful social impact work that you're doing. Feel free to do that in the chat. I myself am joining you from Calcutta, India, and it's around 7:30 p.m. here. So it's I don't know, evening would be what I would call it here. Oh, I see a couple of us are writing in the chat. Oh, Gemma from University of Lagos, Nigeria is advancing Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is quality education. Welcome, Gemma. Welcome, Fatima. She's joining from Pakistan. Health Services Academy is working on SDG 5, which is gender equality. Welcome, Fatima. Sia is joining us from National Law University in New Delhi, India. Sophia is joining us from Green University of Bangladesh. Thank you so much for joining. Bushra Faisal from Qatar University. Hi, Bushra. Madison is joining us from Northeastern, and she's advancing SDG 13, which is climate action. She's joining us from Boston, United States. Wow, we have, so many of you are introducing yourselves. Thank you so much for engaging with us in the chat. This is representative of our truly global nature of the fellowship community we have here. If there are any Millennium Fellows who would like to raise their hands and would like to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their project, feel free to do so. You can raise your hand and we can quickly unmute, but I'm loving all the wonderful introductions that we're getting. Azim Premji University, Bangalore, Christ University, Bangalore, which is also in India. We are Pontificia Catholic University of Peru. Hi, Lilia. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, all right. Thank you so much. As all of you are introducing yourselves in the chat box, we can move on to introducing our very special guest for today. It's such an honor for me to be able to moderate this webinar and to be able to talk to you, Ellen. So today we are joined by Ellen Banda-Aaku. She is a UK-born Zambian novelist, children's writer, and screenwriter. Her works have been published in Australia, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, the UK, US, and Zambia. Her debut novel, Patchwork, won the Penguin Prize for African Writing. It was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Book Prize and has been translated into German and French. She was also the overall winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2007 and won the Macmillan Writers' Prize for Africa in 2003. Ellen, who is based between Zambia and the UK, has over the years facilitated creative writing workshops in various countries, including Ghana, Malawi, Rwanda, South Africa. She has judged numerous literary prizes, such as the Malawi Peer Knit, a national novel writing competition. She has a master's in creative writing from the University of Cape Town. More recently, she has created and written 2 TV drama series and produced a TV comedy series for the Southern African DSTV channel. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today. I would pass it over to you for your initial remarks.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon. It's late afternoon here in Osaka, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you for everybody who's taken the time to come on and listen. And I hope what I share with you today is going to be useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I would love to know if you could share a little bit about your journey as a writer and how that started and the how that journey has transformed to till now.
Mhm. So for me, this is a story I think where I'm a bit different with most writers, is that for me, writing, becoming an author happened by surprise. It was really by chance. It wasn't planned. I wasn't one of these people who, when I was young, thought to myself, one day I'll be a writer. In fact, if I'm honest, if up to the age of 25, if someone had said to me, you're going to be a writer and a filmmaker one day, I would have laughed out loud because it was nowhere near my radar as things I wanted to do. Now, this happened because when I look back with hindsight as to why I didn't realize what I wanted to be, is that I grew up in Zambia at a time where, and most African countries were like that, it was pretty, everything was sort of planned for you. So my life sort of happened naturally. Went to nursery, primary school, secondary school, ended up at university. And because at the time Zambia only had one university, what happened was everything was done centrally. So you're sitting you write your grade, what was called the Form 5, end of secondary school exams. And then the results were centrally brought together and marked. And then you were pushed into a school, into University of Zambia, the only university in the country. And they actually placed you in your courses. So what happened is you either end up in natural sciences or education, or you ended up in social sciences or humanities. And you just sat at home and you got a letter that said, look, you've been accepted, and they placed you in a school and the government paid for your education. So it was a very open system. It was fair and it was comfortable. But as you realize with life, sometimes comfort has its downside. When you're comfort, what it does is it doesn't open up your mind and creativity to think of, what do I really want to do? It doesn't allow you to ask yourself those introspective questions. Who am I? What do I want to do? Or who do I want to be? Because it's all planned for you. So it's all planned for you. So you go along. And what it does, it doesn't give you the space to sit back and think, hang on, what do I really want to do? So I end up at University of Zambia. Obviously, I'm going through all the motions. Meanwhile, as a child, I wasn't a very big reader, but I told a lot of stories. I was always telling stories, and I got into trouble for it because my mom and they used to say, you're always telling lies, because I'd have this overactive imagination, and I would sit there, and anybody comes to bother us to visit, I'll tell them this long story, and then someone would say to me, when did it happen? And then I'll be quiet because I've made it all up. So eventually I figured out what I would say is I had a dream. And I'll make up these stories which I hadn't read, but I'll say it's a dream, just so that I don't get into trouble and accused of lying, because my mom used to worry a lot. You tell so many lies. The interesting thing, when I then became a writer and I started thinking, why didn't I think of writing? Is I think I didn't make that link. And society, the site I grew up, I didn't make that link between my storytelling and being an author, or formalizing that creativity. So, when I look back, I tend to think in life, you aspire to be what you see. Because I grew up, yes, we had books, yes, we read, but I didn't see any female Zambian authors. And I think apart from that, industries or careers like writing or whatever were considered leisure. It was at a time where writing wasn't considered a serious, so to speak, profession. I mean, it was like even those days playing football. It was considered leisure. It's not like today where everybody thinks that's where you should be. So I think for those reasons, because I didn't see anybody like me was a writer, because writing wasn't considered a serious profession, I didn't think of ever being a writer. So at some point, I did fast forward. I'm now older. I leave Zambia. I go back to the UK. And then I start thinking about writing. But then at that point, life takes over. I've got a young family. I'm working. I'm trying to do my second degree. So I'm struggling a bit. But I'm at the back of my mind, I keep thinking, I'd really love to write. That passion and desire for writing is burning in me. Fortunately, at some point, I moved to Ghana. And I had very young children. And that's when I thought to myself, I'm going to write. I started writing a novel. But as soon after I started writing a novel, I came across a newspaper article, which was Macmillan Publishers. And they were doing a call where they said there are not enough African writers writing African stories for children. So they decided to come up with a scheme where it was like a competition where they said, write this story. And I wrote, and I thought, okay, this is my chance to write, because then I have this time frame, I have this project, and let me write this story. And I wrote this story. And I didn't tell anybody I was writing, right? Because at this point, I'm thinking, I'm not really a writer. I'm not confident enough to share. So I was really shocked when after that, they came around and said I'd won the prize for being a Writer's Prize for Africa. I'd really enjoyed writing the story. I didn't think I'd win, but I then started getting very comfortable and I found that writing made me very happy. And I thought, this is what I want to do. Soon after, the British Council had a scheme, which was a scheme called Crossing Borders, where they were trying to encourage African writers. So they would pair an African writer with a British writer as mentors one-on-one to write, to sort of like hone our writing skills. And because I had won the Macmillan and been published, I was put on this scheme, and I was in Accra at the time. My mentor, a British lady, kept saying to me, you write well, but your short stories keep reading like a summary of a novel. At this point, I didn't know there was difference between a short story and a summary of a novel. But as she explained, I could tell what she was saying, but I couldn't fix it. I then come across a man in Ghana who says to me, do you know what? The Commonwealth have a writing competition, but it's very short. It's only 600 words. And that's what made me enter, because I thought, let me practice writing a short story since I can't write one. And that's what made me write the story that I submitted to the Commonwealth. And at this point, I'm not even thinking of winning. I'm just thinking, let me just prove to myself, let me practice writing a proper short story and not a summary of a novel. And then I won, I end up being the overall winner of the Commonwealth. So that sort of like made me think, wow, this is where I want to be. I really enjoyed writing. I found my space in life. Let me become a writer. At this time, I'm about 35 at this time. So it's not a career. I didn't start it young. And I thought, okay, but then because I want to really work in this field, I want to be a writer, and this wants to be my career path, late as it might be. At this time, I'd worked in bank in the UK, I'd worked for civil service in the UK, but I thought, at least now I found what I want to be, and it's never too late. So I decide, if I want to really advance as a writer, maybe I need to make it more academic. Let me sort of certify my position. So let me go and do a master's in creative writing. So I'm all packed. I'm leaving Ghana. I'm going to the University of Cape Town. I wanted a university in Africa because I thought maybe they'll appreciate my writing more. Let me go to the University of Cape Town. And just before I left, I had a friend whose uncle was a professor at a university in Ghana. And I went to share with him because I thought he's one person who'd be really excited that I'm going to do this academic qualification. And I remember going to him and saying, look, uncle, I'm packing. I'm leaving Accra. I'm going to do an MA in creative writing. And I assumed he'll be really happy for me, but I saw his face fall. And he says to me, why would you do that? Why would you, who's just won 2 big awards in writing without an ounce of element of training in how to write, go now and go and try to have an academic qualification in writing? He said to me, you're going to risk unlearning your natural skill and flair for writing because you already have it. So going somewhere where you're going to learn rules and whatever it is and guidances and sort of about how to write could kill your creativity. I was stunned at that point because that's not the reaction I expected. And I think what shocked me even more is that I had thought to myself he would be really happy for me. But I was already packed and ready to go. So I thought, okay, I mean, what do I do at this point? Let me go. I did end up at the university, but I have to say that even though I was learning and doing the creative writing at the University of Cape Town, in the back of my mind, what he said to me kept ringing in my head. Yes, there are rules. Yes, there are the aspects and there are sort of factors that you have to consider when writing. But I kept saying to myself, don't lose what you already have. Because I was mindful, because I felt he had made a point. But when I look back, I think the MA was beneficial. I mean, firstly, the program was such that we wrote you were asked to write a book or something, a final piece of work. And that's when I wrote Patchwork. So at least maybe if I hadn't gone, I wouldn't have had the time to write the full adult novel. And it also sort of made me aware what the factors are in writing, what to consider and what to do. And I think some of the things I was doing anyway, without knowing what I was doing, but it sort of formalized it in my head. So I think it was beneficial, even just the feedback you get from peers and what you were doing. So I came away not feeling that I had unlearned how to write, but that there was a plus side. So that was when I decided let me go and do the MA. I went to the MA, I did my novel writing, I wrote Patchwork, and I decided, okay, now I've made it, and now I can start my work as a storyteller. I then went on and wrote a few books, and I carried on writing. I got a few commissions to write books and got published. At some point, I thought, look, I'm writing books. Let me challenge myself to do something different. So I thought, let me go into script. Unfortunately, the opportunity came because somewhere in Zambia, they were looking for script writers to write a show for one of the multi-choice channels. And I wrote, I joined them. For me, the transition from author, and I think to transition from author to script writer, my biggest challenge was that when I was writing a book, I would write the manuscript. When I write the manuscript, when it's a finished book, what I wrote in the manuscript is what I would find in the book. I then started writing scripts and discovered it's really different. It's more collaborative. So I'll create this whole story, write them in my mind. I can see what's happening. I can see the characters. And then I come and see the final production. And I'm thinking, because obviously it's more collaborative. The actors bring their own to it. They bring their own personality to create the characters. The producers, when they then pick up, the producers also may have their own considerations to make, considering budget, location, whatever it is. They have to have their own, they have to look at what they look at to change what they can. There's different stages that it goes through. The director has the right to put his vision to the story. So the director comes in and does his bits. Then there's post-production, the editing. And as we all watch films, we know the color palettes of the film, the music that they add to it, the way they pace it and tell this, all those stages are part of the storytelling when it comes to the film. And for me, who had come from writing a novel, I struggled slightly with that. It took me a while to adjust, but now I'm in that space. I'm really enjoying script writing. I've come to accept that's the way it works, and what everybody puts into it rightfully and have the creative license to do gives us a final product. So yes, I'm in that space where I've accepted that writing and I'm enjoying writing. I've since gone on, I've done a few documentaries recently. And I think, yeah, it's just, I consider myself what I'd call a storyteller. So whatever genre that I can write stories in, I try and write stories in. So just to share a bit of things that perhaps along the way I've learned from my journey in the different spaces that I've occupied. And these are just a few things that have from my experience, which I tend to pass on when people ask me, what have you learned from your journey? I think the first thing for me is I'm mindful that focus can be distracting. It's very important to focus. It's good to focus, but what focus does sometimes is give you tunnel vision. So sometimes you're focused too much on getting to the end and your goal that you need to remind yourself that sometimes it's better to step back a bit, because when you step back, then you see the bigger picture and you may discover that there are other routes that you can take to get to where you're going. Another point perhaps I'll share is wherever you are in your life and what you're doing and what your purpose is and where you find your space, it's always important to take others with you. And I think for me, that resonates in the sense that if when I was younger, I had seen more authors coming, maybe perhaps to my school or read more Zambian books, I would have thought earlier to be an author. And that's why now I sort of make a conscious effort in Zambia. I do go out to schools, I share my books, I tell them my story so that those who are the few there who might be interested in telling stories, to be a storyteller, can do so because they can see someone who's what they aspire to be. I think the third point I'd raise is I learned in life that we have to be open to learning. And when I say that, I remember being at university where I had a lecturer who once said, the more you know, the more you realize how little you actually know. Because sometimes you learn and you think, I know everything. But as you go further into your learning, you realize, my goodness, there's this and there's that and there's that. And then you realize there's so much knowledge and information in the world, we'll never know everything. But it's important because as you learn that there's so much and there's so much more to learn. And I think what happens often is there's that intentional learning. In the lecture room, you know you're learning from your facilitator, your lecturer, you're learning from your peers. So you're learning mindful, you're mindful. This is a learning space. But a lot of learning that happens and where there's a lot of information is a learning where we're not even aware that we're learning. And perhaps the person or the people we're learning from are not people who are typically people would expect to learn from. Maybe people younger from us, from a completely different culture, perhaps uneducated and we're educated, but there's so much there to learn. And I think sometimes when we have a perception of where we learn and how we learn, can hinder our growth when it comes to learning. The fourth point I make for me is in life is always to embrace change, even when it's not very good change, because change happens. We're human beings, we're on this planet, and change happens. For me, my life experience was that when I came back from the UK with my family at the age of about 3.5, my father passed away in a car accident at the age of 32. What that's taught me from a young age is that change happens and you've got to be prepared for it. You can have your life. My mom's life was all set up till she was widowed. So I think I grew up at an advantage to my peers when it came to accepting and embracing change, because I was always mindful that, yes, I may be comfortable in this space, I'm doing this, and this is how it's not going to change. Change happens and it comes unexpectedly. Knowing it's coming doesn't make it less painful, but I think it helps you to adjust because you realize we're moving, change happens no matter where we're part of the world where these things happen. So it's just to be mindful of it. The last thing I'll share about life, and perhaps no matter where you are in life, an approach that I think I always say is what I call the 3 Ps: perseverance, professionalism, and passion. I think when you apply those to whatever you're working on or your project or in life, it can enhance where you're going to go and how you end up there. The perseverance keeps you going because it's not always easy. It stops you getting discouraged when you hit a block because you know I'm persevering, I'm carrying on with this. Professionalism is what you present of yourself to other people, and it's always positive when you're pressured, and people remember that. They remember the outlook and they judge you on that. So it's always mindful to work, no matter what space you are, to be professional. And passion, it's your heart. Your heart should be in it and always follow your heart. Yes, there's a head as well, and the head is more logical and reasoning, and you can't completely ignore your head. But ultimately, I think whenever you're in a space where you can, follow your hearts. Thank you so much. I hope I haven't taken too much time. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ellen. This was so inspiring and so wonderful. I think I learned so much. Especially when I was growing up, I think my parents really encouraged my reading and writing habit. But then after a certain age, when the focus should be on, I think, very different subjects, very different disciplines, because I think, like many Asian parents do, they want you to succeed in life, and there is a set path. That encouragement kind of stopped, and actively persuading me to do something different, and that's what the society was also telling me, and I think it tells a lot of us. So to get out of that noise and then coming back to what we want to do, what we love to do, for in your story, to write after so many years from telling stories when you were a kid. That is such a beautiful journey, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I think the 3 Ps that you shared, I think it's a very good, how do I say it, like a it's really important to carry those 3 Ps in whatever you do. It doesn't matter if you are in social impact work, if you are just an academic, if you are a doctor, engineer, teacher, whatever that might be. It's important that your heart is where you're doing it. You are being true to yourself, you're empathetic, compassionate, and yeah, just thank you so much for these wonderful words. For our Millennium Fellows who have joined us, feel free to put your questions in the chat box or simply raise your hand, and we will start the Q&A really soon. But before we move on to the Q&A from our fellows, Ellen, I have a couple of questions for you. So you the process of writing, of course, is unique to everyone, and you have written for both scripts, and you have, of course, written books. And I know you touched upon that subject a little bit in your keynote. I'm curious to know, when you're writing for, say, a documentary or a TV series or a movie, does that creative process look very different for you personally, how you approach it, than when you are, say, writing a novel or a short story?
I think for me, as I said, I'm a storyteller. So storytelling yeah, it covers all those, whatever genre you use to tell the story. I'm very strong on character. And I believe that whether it's a documentary, the character will be your subject, whether it's a book for children or with adults, whatever, it's always the strong point for me is the character. I think if you you have a strong character in terms of if it's fictional, they're believable, they're three-dimensional, and they work. If you create them to be so realistic, what happens is most times, no matter where you put them, audiences will follow. So I've always been one who sort of like, even if I have a plot in the back of my mind, I always make sure I start with a character. Name for me is always important. I give them a name and then I just sort of let them develop in my head. And I get to a point where I ask myself, what do they do if I put them in this situation? What do I do if I put them in that situation? And when I teach writing, that's the one thing I always say. I say, if you know your character very well and you've built them well, you can then throw them into any scenario in your plot and you know how they'll react because you've given them a background, you've given them a history. So for instance, if they're scared of dogs or different, you know how they react when they come across a dog, for argument's sake. So it's just knowing your character very, very well. And I think for me, that's what I think is my strength. I always start from there. So if it's a documentary, I'll make sure I've got a subject who's compelling in what they're doing in some way or the other. And I think it doesn't have to be a dramatic sort of subject, but maybe even more in a subtle way, but are impactful. I did a documentary recently called Auntie Rebecca, which was a lady who's living with HIV and is a cervical cancer survivor in Zambia. And she's made it her mission as a volunteer to go around and educate people about cervical cancer in Zambia, which we have a very high rate of. And for me, just the work that she was doing, that she was self-motivated with no pay or anything to go around, I thought that was a very strong character. So I picked her and thought, look, I'm going to follow her around and tell her story. So I don't think there's much difference. It's just starting with a very good and compelling character. And I think when you've got that, you're halfway there in whatever medium you choose to tell your story.
Thank you so much for that answer, Ellen. And I think, as a reader, I'm not much of a writer. I don't think I write very well, but I think as a reader, that is one thing that draws you, isn't it? The characters, the way they behave, the way they talk, the way those very subtle things are intertwined in the stories, what makes a story so beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing that, Ellen. Another question I do have for you is because all the Millennium Fellows that we have here, everybody is working on a particular social impact project that is based on a community issue that they have identified. And in your book, The Elephant Girl, you wrote, and I quote, "I was born right where I live, in the same room where I still slept every night. It was all I'd ever known, and it made me feel safe to know this land, its smell, its sounds, like I knew my own body." What will you want our fellows today to take away from the story of Jama's rootedness and her identity, and that can help our fellows also understand the importance of belongingness in social impact work, and how important that tie to the community is, to the place that they belong to is?
I think identity is very important, and for someone who's lived in very different spaces and the thing, for me, I think it's important to carry your identity with you wherever you go. So even if you find yourself in a different space, and I've had people ask me that question before, where are you from? Where do you think? And I always think I carry home. I've been asked that question many times. Where is home? Because most of you born in the UK, lived in Zambia, lived in Ghana. I say I carry home inside of me. I think a lot of times identity starts from the place where you were first, your formative years. And I think it's important to always have that grounding into your own culture and identity, because then, of course, it's important to adapt. You go into different spaces, you may not be working in your own space or someone else's space. And you're taking yourself in there, but there needs to be an appreciation of the people who you're working with. Their culture, their environments may be very different to yours, but it's always this openness of knowing. And as I was talking about learning about what spaces you're in and appreciating that I'm different. They need to learn about me. I need to learn about them. But I think identity is very important. We need to hold on to it. We need to embrace it, who we are. And I think it also earns a lot of respect when you go into a place. And yes, I've lived in different places, but this is who I am, and this is what I want to. This is who I am, and this is how I'll always be. Even though I'm open to appreciating other people and changing, because at the end of the day, we're all changing. Even our identities and our cultures and who we are changes as we live in different spaces. And the world is opening up, isn't it? So I think it's just important to hold on to who you are and to carry that with you, because that's the only way we live, even through generations. Because then one day you will have future generations, and you have to ensure that your culture and your identity carries on through future generations.
Definitely. And I think with the world that we're living in today, we're so globalized and our identities keep on changing and we keep on consuming so many different things and different things become a part of who we are. But to find that rootedness, to find that belongingness becomes important. Hard, a little difficult, I think, as well, but really
Yes,
important as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, Ellen. I do see so many questions in the chat and a few raised hands. So I will start with the raised hands. Blessed, are you able to unmute and ask your question to Ellen?
Okay. Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Blessed Falagbade from Federal University of Technology, Futmina, Court A. My question is, as a social impact advocate, how can writers like you make make use of storytelling to make a social impact in your communities?
Okay,
That's my question.
Can I go ahead and answer it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You can answer it, ma'am.
I think it's very important. I've always said, as I said, I've also done some work like I've done especially with cancer, where people have written people's stories for them, those who are not very comfortable writing their own stories. I think storytelling and books and stories are a very effective way of sharing information and knowledge. So when whatever your principles are doing, or what you're trying to share, or your objectives, if you put it in a story, they're more likely to reach more audiences, because what the people do is they learn unintentionally, they learn without thinking or knowing. I think what you need to do is, yes, storytellers and authors need to write more social impact stories. I mean, stories that affect social issues in our communities. What we need to be mindful of as an author when we do that is not to preach. Because once you tell a story and the reader picks it up and immediately can tell you've got this message and this is what you're hitting the message on the head, then if people sort of close down, because then they start seeing it as you teaching them. And sometimes the audiences are not as receptive because they're coming to a story to enjoy themselves and being entertained. So often what I think is needed is a lot of authors to be taught how to tell stories in a way that people are open to them and they get the message and the moral, maybe even make up, not really dictate even the message or moral of the story. Leave it open and write it in a way that your reader themselves are left thinking about it. And even if they're left with questions and not the answer, sometimes it's a good thing because they're learning from that and they want to know more. So yes, I do think storytellers and authors have a role to play in social advocacy, definitely. And it's just a matter of being equipped enough to do it so that it's effective and the messages that are being put across are absorbed the way they should be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for the response, and Blessed for the question. Yeah, it definitely, I think, especially if it's social impact work and we are working with community, is where we are essentially outsiders and we come with a very preachy tone. It's not going to work out very well and it's not going to be very purposeful. So thank you so much, Ellen, for that really, really important response. Antarika, I do see your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hello, Alan. Thank you for the insightful session. I really enjoyed it. I'm Antarika. I'm from Christ University, Bangalore, India. And so my project, oh, by the way, am I audible? Okay. So my project for MCN is called Restory Reclaiming Narratives, and I'm advancing SDG 10 and 11, which is reduced inequalities and sustainable cities and communities. And as part of my project, I aim to go to marginalized communities and work with them to get their authentic local narratives and stories, and then collate them into a digital archive, a bigger anthology of sorts. So my question was, what would you advise me as a storyteller to keep in mind while working for my project as not just a writer but a collator of stories as well, so that I can create an authentic collection of narrators.
I think that's a very interesting question. I sort of have done a collection of stories for me for people sharing their cancer stories. And my lesson from there really is you've got to make yourself accessible to the person, because sometimes you come from a level, it's really going to very rural communities. They need to have that trust, and that trust only comes when they can feel you're relatable to them. So you have to let them know that you're going in from an angle where you want something from them, that you're appreciating what they're sharing with you, that you would like them to, that you're not judging them in any way, and that even from whether it's whatever space you find them in, you sort of make them feel that you are comfortable in their space. Because only when they have that trust, relatability, and comfort are they then going to open up. Because sometimes you actually go in, the more you do these stories, you actually start reading people's body language. And sometimes when you get there, you can tell people are stiffened and they're probably thinking, you've come in my space. Maybe they don't want to talk, maybe they're embarrassed, maybe they don't know what it's about. Some people, maybe they're exploiting them, you want to take their story and you're making money out of it. But I think it's always telling them what you're trying to do so that they see that you are learning and they're doing something positive by sharing their story, but at the same time that you also need what they're doing, so that it's mutually beneficial. And I think most importantly also, it's not judging, because sometimes, especially when depending on the subject matter, when sometimes it's more taboo subject matters, you find that if you show judgments, I mean, I was teaching a class the other day where I'm teaching people how to tell stories on behalf of people. And in Zambia, people are very religious. So I was telling all of them that some of the girls that don't go into a space and start talking about that religion, or insisting you pray before you start telling, because some people may not be, as much as you may like them to be, they may not be the same religion or the same as you, but it's also just being open and accessible so that they feel comfortable and they're not judging them. I think that's the most important thing. Once people are comfortable, you'll be amazed at how much they'll open up and share. Thank you. I hope it answers your question.
Thank you so much, Antarika, for the question, and Ellen for the response. And definitely, it's very important for us to be honest when we are collecting these narratives and anthologies. So thank you so much for that response, Ellen. I see a question from Lilia in the chat box, and she's asking, when working with testimonies, what do you consider to be the best way to maintain that balance between respect and realism through the use of art?
I'm not sure I really understand the question, but I'll try. Sorry, can you repeat it?
Would you want me to repeat the question?
Yes.
Okay, so they're asking that what would be the way when we are working with testimonies to be the best way to maintain that balance between, I think when they say respect, I think they are meaning respect for those from whom we are collecting the testimonies, and the aspect of realism while we are then putting it together.
I think, as I said to the answer the previous question, I think it's about, a lot of times also your judgment yourself comes in. So you go in and you're getting the stories, and you want them to feel comfortable what they're saying, but you also have to apply a bit of how much is believable, how much you feel they are sharing authentically. A lot of that, I think, after all, just comes with experience. And what I always tend to do is, once they've shared their stories, is to make sure I read them back, or I find if it's a different language, someone, so that they sign up for it and say, are you sure this is what you're saying? Because sometimes what happens often, and I find it even when I do ghostwriting, is that people talk and tell you the story. And then I always say to them before they do that, just talk and be honest, but you'll be surprised when you see your words in print that you might find the way it's coming across and you're thinking, no, that's not what I wanted to say. Not that anybody has misinterpreted it, but somehow it just feels different when you read your own words off the page. So I think it's always important to just let people talk and be really honest. But once you've got it down, make sure someone who speaks the same language, who understands, make sure it goes back to them and they read it for themselves so that they sign off on it, because then you're covered on both sides. I hope that answers the question.
This is such a beautiful response, Ellen, because it's so right. I never thought about it that, yeah, when we say things and then when we see the same thing written in print, it is different, and we can interpret that differently. So thank you so much for sharing that and pointing that out. Another question in the chat from Ojaswe Karki. I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing your name. And they're asking, you talked about building a strong character for writing a good book. How do we actually make a character so intriguing, and ensure that they are not stereotypical or bland?
If I may start by saying that there are characters, stereotypes don't come from nowhere. So when you have a stereotype, it's because there's a particular sort of person who typically behaves the same way. So I think it's always mindful to be aware of that. When you say a character that's not bland, there are personalities who are bland in life. So it's a matter of, when you're a writer, is that to have a set of characters that come together in a story. So even if, let's say, you have one very engaging, inciting, intelligent character, normally what you're trying to do is put them against someone who is not the same, because when you have two of the same characters, that it doesn't really gel that well. So I think it's also it's mindful to make a character, give them, apart from giving them personal background, give them personalities, give them quirks, characteristics, hobbies, so that we all know, even just personality, we're all different personalities, and always give them something that's unique or different so that they can stand out. But at the same time, you don't want all your characters to be like that. So don't lose sight of the fact that there are some people who are just very bland and won't talk. And those in themselves can be a bit of an interesting character, as long as you don't use them too much, because then it will be too much of them doing nothing. But it's important to try and incorporate as many different characters as you can in a book. Yes, of course, you want them to be engaging so that they're memorable. But sometimes it's the quiet characters, the ones who don't do anything, who are memorable. So I think that's what makes writing so interesting. It's striking that balance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for the answer. And I see another question on the chat from Yvonne. It's a bit different, not in terms of the writing process, and they're asking, well, they're saying, your story is so inspiring, ma'am. I am a writer myself and I have written books. Unfortunately, I do not have funding to go ahead with traditional publishing, as I really don't think self-publishing is the way I want to launch myself. I have a book I wrote 3 years ago and it's still sitting in my docs. Can you share your advice on that?
Over the years, the perception of self-publishing is changing. Originally, self-publishing was considered, oh, you're self-publishing because no publisher wants to take your book. It's not necessarily the case anymore, and I think more and more people are starting to appreciate that. The only difference is that when you self-publish, obviously the things that your publisher would normally do, and your publisher, because they want to make money from your book, will make sure it's completely polished and they'll put in as much as they can so that they can sell it to make their money. It just means that if you decide to go self-publishing route, you have to make sure you find people and experts to do the proper editing for you, to do the proper marketing. So you have to spend that money on your own. I do believe that if you find that you've tried, I mean, there's stories of people who've sent books to 100 different publishers, and then the 101 publisher is the one who publishes it. So it's a matter of you maybe deciding, maybe give yourself some time and say, look, I'm going to send out this book to, I don't know, 100 publishers this year. If it doesn't publish it by next year, I'm self-publishing. So that if you do go the self-publishing route, you have convinced yourself that you tried the publishing angle and it didn't work, but you believe that your book deserves to be published. And then make sure you invest in the resources so that the book is a quality book, as it would be if you had gone to a good and reputable publisher. I think you have to worry less and less about that perception of self-publishing, meaning that nobody else wanted to publish your book. And once people, if you invest in it well and it's done in a professional way, once people pick it up, they'll realize that no, it wasn't because no one else wanted to publish it. It's just that maybe it didn't suit. Publishers look for different books at different times and different seasons and different. So it doesn't necessarily mean nobody, it wasn't a good book. Maybe the publishers just weren't ready for the story you were telling. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing that perspective. I think, yeah, there are a lot of, different ideas about what self-publishing looks like, and that perception has definitely changed over the years. So thank you so much for highlighting that, Ellen. Another question on the chat is from Kazia Ibrahim, and they're asking, how do you suggest we can improve our writing without attending any formal academic program?
I think the answer is clearly reading. The more you read, the more it does improve your writing. You need to find books and authors that the way they write, whether it's their tone, whether it's their language, resonates with you. See how the books flow, and then just read more and more of them. I do believe that does help. And then just start writing. I mean, develop your character, develop your story, write it, and every now and again, make space away from it. I think that's another thing you need to do. You always need to write, take a few months off and then go back to it. Because just by rewriting, that's how you hone your story and moves on. Another thing you can do is share with people. I don't advise you share with too many people because writing is subjective. So if you share it with 10 people, they're going to come back with 10 different things that they pick up. So have one or two people who are also readers who can sort of give you feedback. But it's also important that you always bear in mind that feedback is just post views. The final say is with you. But I just think reading helps. And just write and share your story with different people. I know I went and did the MA and I said it was beneficial, but I do believe, and I've read so many authors who write beautifully, who don't have a qualification in it. This day and age, even online, there's so many resources even online about how to write well. Go in and see what resonates or where you find the same message being told, and just apply that as you write. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that is the most wonderful thing we can do, right? To read, to read more. As I was telling you before we started, that the only thing I think I'm good at is reading. So whenever anybody tells me read, I'm like, yes, we're gonna read some more. But thank you so much for that, for the response, Ellen, and for the question, Ibrahim. Really appreciate that, Ellen. Okay, so there are a couple more questions here. Yeah, I would actually love to know your opinion on this. I do see a question from Bin Rahab Fru, but just to add a little bit of what I would also like to know, that with artificial intelligence taking up the world as is, and as a writer, how do you look at artificial intelligence and many people using artificial intelligence to write stories? Do you see it as something that is a part of this era that we're going through, or as because AI also takes away that human touch? So what would be your opinion on the use of AI or the inclusion of AI into the world of writing as we are seeing nowadays?
Obviously, as a writer, for me, I don't. It's when it comes about, it's a bit of a threat, because what are we going to do now? And AI is doing it. Now, I just this afternoon had a discussion with someone who was saying, AI is going to start doing anything. Maybe we should all just become programmers, because then we're not writing. And someone said, no, AI is not. You can tell that it's AI. But I thought these are early days. They're going to refine it. That's just my personal view. I think it will get better. I think it will get to a point where, and I don't say it because I think it's a positive thing. It's not for me as a writer. I do think it will be refined and honed to a point where it will be quite difficult to say this is AI. I think it's sad, especially from an academic point of view now, because already with all the gadgets and all these computers and all these packages that help you write, even on your university students and all, how do you really hone your craft? And there's value in writing, be it academically or non-academically, if the system is doing it for you. I think institutions are going to have a lot of work of finding ways to assess students, because most of our assessment, the way we assess in universities, is based on our writing. And if we're not doing our writing ourselves, how do we then assess and mark students? So I think generally I can see the good side. I mean, I myself sometimes think, oh, if I want to write a quick letter and put it through, I can see that. But I think it's problematic. And I think it's more problematic for writers and learners and all than we care to admit at this moment. I don't know whether bringing in regulation, like they say, to curb it will help. I do think it's here to stay. I can't see it going away. So it will be interesting to see how the world adjusts to it. And as I say, how do we assess? Because in the past, whether it's writing an application letter or your CV or an assignment, generally you will assess on your quality and intelligence based on how you wrote, depending on which regardless of which language you are writing in. So yes, I would be interested to see what academics and law are saying. How are they getting around artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence?
I actually totally share your perspective. I find artificial intelligence to be really scary. Cannot wrap my head around most of it. And in terms of writing and books, I think it's such an intimate, emotional human activity, and to have artificial intelligence to come in between, I'm not sure, but as you said that it's here to stay, I think yes, it's definitely here to stay, and it would be yeah, I think it's time we should be in a position where we are reevaluating where we use it and how we use it, in academics and creative writing, and how that looks like. Thank you for sharing that perspective, Ellen. I think for one final question here, Ellen, I think we have a lot of folks today joining us who are interested in writing. So for all the young authors who have joined us today and but are still unsure or still feel a bit hesitant to write, what would what would be the one advice you share with them? And what do you think is one aspect that young authors should keep in mind while they attempt to write and publish their work today?
I think writing. I think yes. It's very important. If people want to write, I always encourage people to write what you're passionate about. So if your subject matter, something you know, something you're passionate about, because then it shows you're more comfortable writing about it. I do think that when you are writing, write from the perspective of what resonates with you, and think, and sometimes I think, especially from our perspective in Africa, sometimes we write stories thinking about other cultures. If I call so and so an uncle instead of a first cousin, or a brother, a first cousin, a nephew instead of a first cousin, what do they think in the West? I think it's important to stay authentic to our roots. If we're describing families and aspects of our culture or what we know, stick with it like that. Stories are retold. At the end of the day, we live in a society where we go through a whole lot of the same experiences in life as human beings, but it's always important to put a fresh spin on it. That could be through a very interesting character. That should be through the perspective that you use. Always look out for stories. There's stories everywhere, but tell it from your angle and from your own uniqueness, because then it's going to be a different story. Because sometimes you find writers say, oh, this story has been told. It's the same story that we tell over and over again. I think that's why even in the movies, you find often the same things happen, but we still go back and watch the same thing. So it's always nice to remember that when you're telling the story, and just put a fresh spin on it, and always talk about or tell the stories on subjects that are authentic and true to you. At least start from there. Once you've written as many, then you can say, okay, I'm going to go, I'm sitting in Zambia, but I'm going to write a story about some town in Russia, perhaps. But as it is, there are people there that can write that story. And often we have stories very, very close to home. I think the mistake we make as authors sometimes, we always look for dramatic stories. There's value sometimes in very subtle, simple stories. So whatever rings true to you is authentic, and to you seems like a story, go ahead and tell it. Thank you.
That is such a beautiful advice. Go ahead and tell it. So for all the Millennium Fellows who have joined us today, who love to write or are just gonna be starting their writing journey, go ahead and tell the story that you're passionate about. Thank you so much, Ellen, for this wonderful, wonderful session. It was such an honor to have you join us and share your insightful remarks, your journey, and to answer all the questions from our Millennium Fellows. I would now give you the space, Ellen, if you would like to share any final remarks with our fellows.
Thank you so much for taking the time to log in and for us to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed myself. I hope what I've shared has been useful. And good luck wherever you are in the world and with projects that you're doing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, it was such an honor to have you join us. For Millennium Fellows, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being an engaging audience. Thank you so much for all the lovely questions in the chat and for all those who raised their hands. We have an upcoming webinar tomorrow with Ambassador Scott DeLisi at 11 a.m. Eastern. You already would have that information in your emails. But feel free to also check out the Millennium Fellowship portal. The registration link would be there as well. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much, Ellen. All the best, everyone, for your Millennium Fellowship projects. And thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Same to you. Bye.